Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. So we're trying a new theme this month in November, and we are looking at our green planet. So oftentimes it's really, really easy to forget about the green when we see our big charismatic animals. They move like us. They're cute to us. We pay a lot of attention to them. Now, plants have this amazing world where they defend themselves. They compete for resources in space. They do all kinds of amazing things for us. It's just at a different time scale, a time scale we're not used to, so we often overlook it. So over the next few weeks, we're connecting with scientists and researchers and explorers who are sharing the green world with us. And so joining us today, I'm really excited. We have Meg Lowman joining us, also known by CanopyMeg. She is the world's first Arbornaut. So I'm sure you've heard of astronauts. I'm sure you've heard of aquanauts going underwater. Well, Arbornauts go up into the canopy, an incredible ecosystem that is understudied. There are so much biodiversity. There's a ton of new species to be discovered. So she's worked in 40 countries, and she's pioneered the toolkit for exploring our 8th continent, that wild forest canopy. So she mentors young girls, underserved students, and recently started Mission Green to try and save the world's last highest biodiverse forest by building things like canopy walkways and encouraging ecotourism. So she recently received the Explorers Club Medal of Exploration in 2023. That's the last time I saw her in person in New York. I'm going to bring Meg in live with us right now. Here we go. Hey, Meg, how are you?
Hey, I'm fantastic. Thank you so much.
Oops. Meg, you're in here twice, so I'm going to bump you out once, and that should fix the mic for us.
Sounds perfect.
Okay. Hey. How's that? Can you still hear me okay?
I can hear you just great. As long as you can see me, that's fantastic.
We gotcha. Perfect. All right, Meg. Well, it's so good to have you with us. We have classrooms hanging out backstage with us in camera spots. We have a ton of classrooms tuning in via YouTube. Classes in Hamilton, Ontario are saying hi. North Carolina, Florida. That's great. So keep saying hey in the chat. But Meg, Mission Green sounds really cool. We'd love to get into your canopy world for a little bit with you today.
Sounds fun. Let's climb a tree together.
Perfect. I'm going to make you nice and full screen. I'm going to bring your presentation to the front. I think you just have to hit full screen again on your presentation, and then we'll be good to go.
Okay, I'll do that. Ready to roll. See what happens here.
Perfect. And I'm going to remind our classrooms while Meg is presenting, I'm going to make a Kahoot quiz. So we'll play some Kahoot together as well before we go into our Q&A. Meg, that looks perfect. Full screen. Okay. You and the canopy.
Fantastic. And if there's any problems, just give me a shout and interrupt. But I'd love to share a couple things with all of the students out there. And first of all, this is a picture of the longest canopy walkway in the world. It happens to be in Peru in the Amazon. If there are any teachers or students who ever want to come with me, millions of classes have been in this canopy because a long time ago, as in 1999, probably before you were born, Joe, but there was a thing called the Jason Project, the first virtual classroom expedition in the world that Bob Ballard and I had the privilege of leading. So we were down there with about 3 million kids, all broadcasting back to museums. And ever since then, I take every July about 30 teachers and families and friends. And so this is the 32nd year, next July 25th, if anybody wants to come and do research in the Amazon with me. So with that, I'd love for students to think and maybe raise their hands if they're in a classroom. Have you ever climbed a tree before? And this is, of course, a couple of girls in my hometown learning to climb trees with me. But the neat thing is if you've ever climbed a tree and you just raised your hand, that means you are an Arbornaut. Astronauts explore outer space. You've probably heard of that word. And aquanauts explore undersea. But Arbornauts are a fairly newer science, the study of the whole tree. And believe it or not, it's very recent that we actually studied the whole tree. And just as a true confession, I was one of those geeky extremely shy kids. I never spoke up in class, but I collected wildflowers and I loved to study trees and catch their leaves when they fell in the fall. So as a girl, I was told girls couldn't do science, which kind of made me really sad. But I took my little wildflower collection to the New York State Science Fair and I won a second prize. So that was very inspiring to me back in the good old days. So I dedicate my life now to mentoring girls as well as boys in science, because I think it's really important that we get lots of girls engaged in forest conservation. So that leads me to my first fact or secret to share with you, and that is that canopy science is brand new. Physics is so old, thousands of years old. Chemistry is thousands of years old. Scuba gear was invented in the 1940s, so it's almost 100 years old. We've been going undersea, but it's less than 50 years that we've actually been studying the tops of trees, which is pretty crazy because everybody probably has seen a tree, but almost nobody has explored what lives in it. And here's a couple of my very coolest students. Here's Anthony from California, who studies redwoods. He's 300 feet high, and he figured out the secret about how water gets to the tops of those trees, which was a really awesome discovery. And here are my students in Taiwan, which is a country across the Pacific from California. They're so tiny in this great big tree that I had to show you them in a little circle because they look like ants almost. And that led me to building another tool for canopy access. After I had sewed a harness out of seatbelt webbing and welded a piece of metal to make a slingshot to climb with a rope, I realized, you know what, you can't take a whole class up a rope, and you can't take a group of people into the canopy with a rope. So in 1985, I helped invent this new gear called a canopy walkway or a skywalk. And with those, we can take your whole class all at once and study things all day long. So it's a really great second tool to study in the treetops. And here I am with my best colleague, DC Randall, down in the Amazon, discovering new bugs and using a canopy walkway with all of our teachers and students every summer. A third canopy gadget, in addition to ropes with slingshots and the canopy walkway, would be this amazing inflatable gear. Here's a hot air balloon. Here's sort of a bicycle spoked gadget full of air with a trampoline in the middle that we can use to put in the canopy, almost like having your own base camp up in the treetops. And you can barely see me here coming up to reach out at night to study what insects are up there eating leaves and what cool things are happening at night, because the actual raft is almost like a base camp in the sky. And a fourth thing in our toolkit for canopy research is this construction crane, a little more expensive. Most countries can't afford these. There are only about 10 in the world: Germany, Panama, Japan, China. And so it's a little tougher to afford, but they do give you fantastic access out of the bucket of the crane if you want to study every lizard or every beetle or every leaf that's within the arm of the crane. So that leads me to fact number 2 to share with you, or secret number 2. And 50% of species on the planet live in the tops of trees, which is pretty incredible, especially because we probably know less than 10% of them at this point in time. Loads of flowers, millions and zillions of ants, including this cool species that has a rear end camouflage to look like a leaf. Not just any leaf, but even a leaf with a hole in it. So that's a pretty cool camouflage. Almost every bird nests in the canopy, but not all. Here's a beautiful frigate bird in my home state of Florida that lives in the mangrove canopies. Loads of amphibians and reptiles live in the canopy, millions of species of beetles, and of course, lots of cool animals like this koala in my old homeland of Australia. So if you do become an Arbornaut like me, I hope you love bugs. There are millions of insects in the canopy, admittedly, but you know what? They're so important. We shouldn't squish them. They pollinate everything. They result in all our crops. They help us decompose stuff on the ground that would otherwise pile up, and they provide so many important services for the health of ecosystems. So I hope you love bugs if you become an Arbornaut. And there are also loads of flowers in the canopy. This is the biggest family of flowering plants in the world, the orchids. And half of them live in the tops of trees, feeding off of the rainfall and the little particles of dust that come into them. So it's a pretty cool world up there in the canopy. Some things in the canopy are microscopic. I'm sure some of you students know what this is. You can shout it out in your classroom, and I can't hear you, but I'm sure you're there doing that. They're the most extremophile organism on the planet, according to Animal Planet, and I study them all the time. They're called water bears. They have their own phylum called tardigrade, which is kind of related to nematodes and other small arthropods. But these cute little things, which do look like a bear, float in the water. So they're all over the leaf surfaces in the canopy, in the bark, in the mosses. And these little water bears, probably 20 could fit on your little fingernail, but they are probably the most common thing living in your school playground. If you have any trees or vegetation, they are probably the most common thing in the rainforest canopy. It's just that we have to bring the samples back to the lab to measure them. So think about all those cool things living up there at the top, but maybe you can't always see them with your naked eye. Some things use the canopy, but they don't live up there. Here's a leopard in India that I watched eating her breakfast because she caught it on the forest floor, but she went up there onto a branch to have peace and quiet for her breakfast. I wrote a book. If you're an advanced reader or in high school, you might be happy to read all about my adventures in many different countries. But I just share that because maybe your teachers want to look at that and decide whether or not they would like to come to Peru with me next summer. And that leads me to secret number 3, or fact number 3, to share with all of you. Canopy research is actually fun for all ages. Some things like rocket science and maybe chemistry need a lot of training, and you need to be an adult to do this kind of sophisticated work in chemistry or physics. But canopy research can be done by all ages. And here are some of my best scientists in this picture. Age 10, these 3rd graders are on a canopy walkway I built here in my hometown in Florida, right outside of Sarasota. And they did measurements and drew pictures. And guess what? They found a new species of weevil. They got published in the scientific literature. So at age 10, they are full-fledged, sophisticated scientists just because they use their eyes and ears and nose and mouth to use their 5 senses to see things in the canopy. Even my own kids, when they were little, some of you might have read The Most Beautiful Roof, which is a book about me taking my kids to Belize. And some of you might have read The Leaf Detective, another children's book about me where I share the canopy with a lot of kids. But in my boys' case, because I was a single mom, they got their own harnesses when they were age 6 and 7. And they too became Arbornauts at a young age. Sometimes people say, well, not everybody can be a field biologist because you have to be strong and you have to be bold and brave. But seriously, I don't believe that. So I've spent a lot of my career helping groups of students that didn't think they could do this become successful. And one of my last projects for the last 5 summers was taking kids in wheelchairs into the canopy, because mobility limitation usually suggests to teachers that, oh, these students might better off stay inside. They can't go out on the trail. They can't climb a tree. But guess what? We made some pulleys. We invented a couple gadgets. And here's Rebecca, who's limited to a wheelchair. And she went up in the canopy of Kansas and found 3 new species of water bear. So it just shows you that anybody can become an Arbornaut. We just have to be creative. that leads me to another secret or a fact that's super important. And maybe you've all studied this in your school classes, but trees do keep us alive. And as Joe mentioned in the beginning, they're such a silent partner in our world. They're not as sexy as dolphins or monkeys or primates, but you know what? Without trees, we could never live. And the cool thing about trees is they work while we sleep. They do everything for us. They're an amazing machine that does 10 really important things I want to share with you. It's a good list to take home to your parents, to share with your Sunday schools or your sports teams, because we need everybody to be saving big trees. Trees provide us with fresh water. Their leaves actually cleanse the pollution out of rainfall, which is super important. Trees provide us with shade, which saves a ton of air conditioning and other expenses. Trees provide us with oxygen, which we couldn't live without. 50% of our medicines have come from leaves or bark of trees in their origin. And trees, of course, provide us with timber. If we can harvest carefully, we can keep our forests lasting forever. And trees provide us with amazing foods. You might make a list in your class, but my favorite food comes from trees, which is chocolate. And they also provide us with oranges and cherries and all sorts of cool things. Trees actually save our soil. In cases where there are heavy rainfalls and floods, without trees, the soil goes down the river and into the ocean, never to be returned again to the land, which is really disappointing. Tree trunks store carbon, and because humans are polluting the air with cars and coal-fired power plants and other things, we really rely on trees to take in a lot of the carbon dioxide and make our world cleaner. Trees also control our climate. Areas without trees get drier and hotter, and areas with trees have a much more quality of environment that people can rely on for their daily lives. And trees provide energy from the sun. All plants are the most amazing machines to give us energy from sunlight that we can't really do as human beings. And finally, something surprising probably for most of you, but 6 billion people on the planet use trees for their spiritual value. They can be healthy for kids, as we now know, and they can also be really important in religion. So I'm just going to take you quickly to a country that really relies on trees for their spiritual sanctuary. And here's a Google Earth picture of Ethiopia, loads of area of cleared agriculture, but very dry and very hot, and little tiny droplets of trees left on the landscape, which we can see from this Google Earth. Less than 3% of the trees remaining in northern Ethiopia. And so these trees are actually called church forests, because here's the church in Ethiopia, and here's the trees surrounding the church, because the religion over there believes that a priest should look after the human spirit, but also look after all of God's creatures. So all of the native birds and animals and insects in Ethiopia need these little tiny dots of green forest for their lives. And unfortunately, farmers are plowing into them because they don't know any better. They don't want to do this, but they don't have Google Earth images. They don't have computers or cell phones to look at maps, or they don't have any kind of fences to remind themselves of where to plow. So these church forests are disappearing very quickly with all the animals that don't have as much provision for conservation. Some countries like America and Canada and Australia have a lot of income that they can allocate to conservation. But in a country like Ethiopia and Madagascar and other places, they don't have a lot of extra dollars to spend. So I think these are the most important places to work, because their trees are just as important as ours. So in Ethiopia, I've been working with the priests because they are the stewards of the last trees. And together we're doing a project where we take the stones out of the farmer's field. He is really happy, this farmer, because he doesn't like the stones in his field. And the local people come on the weekends and they build these beautiful stone walls, which we call conservation walls, to protect the boundaries of the church forest. And everybody is so happy about this, and especially the kids, because now they have a future. They have their pollinators, they have the trees, they have the medicines in the trees, and they have this beautiful wall that will protect their heritage for the future. So every country has a different solution, but it's really, really important right now to save trees. In my lifetime, 50% of the world's trees have disappeared, and it's not good enough just to plant. It's great to plant, but grown-up trees house koalas and sloths and all sorts of things. And a tree seedling can't have a koala spending the night on its branches, as you can appreciate. So we really need to save the big trees. And that leads me to my last fact or secret to share with you, and that is saving forests requires more than just scientists. It requires priests, like here in Ethiopia. It requires the mayors of your town, the principal of your school, your teachers, your Sunday schools, your sports teams. Everybody needs to work together to save big trees if you possibly can, because they really do keep us alive. And here are some of my students in Kenya, a place that really doesn't have a lot of extra money for trees, but these kids are working so hard to save the big baobab trees over there, and we're working together to make sure that they too have a healthy future with grown-up trees in their neighborhood. So with that, I will escape from my PowerPoint and turn it back to Joe, and he can maybe direct some questions. Thanks so much for listening.
Perfect, Meg. We jumped right in so quickly. We didn't play the really cool Mission Green video you sent me. So I think we should check out that video, and then we'll get into some Q&A action. So bear with me for one moment while I bring the video into the call, the audio sharing too. So that's good. Here it is. Perfect. And now I'm going to go full screen, and then we should be able to see it nice and full screen. And then I will hit play.
I never knew girls could become scientists. My generation didn't have role models like that. But I just doggedly loved the science, really was passionate about that type of work. And suddenly I'm the first person climbing a tree to see this whole new world at the top.
So how does a girl grow up and become a tree climber as a profession?
I'm Meg Lowman, nicknamed CanopyMeg. I've spent the last 45 years climbing trees, which has been amazing. And I've worked in over 40 countries on different tree canopy issues.
I think all of you are so aware that in my lifetime, and maybe some of yours, half of the primary forests of the world have disappeared due to human activities. Fires, climate change, clearing, agriculture, logging, all sorts of things are really changing this landscape so rapidly. What have I and my hundreds of colleagues done that wasn't as effective as it should have been?
Destruction of the Amazon rainforest. Forest canopies are obviously a huge solution to climate change. Treetops produce oxygen, fruits, medicines, timber, they control the water cycle. Trees also store carbon, which offsets our own pollution as human beings. The time has come for us to absolutely take innovative action. believe that we can use the toolkit of Arbornauts to conserve forests. We have to save the forest right now because it is impossible to replace if it disappears.
Okay, well, there we go. Some amazing visuals, but a little scary too.
It's disappointing, but we can fix it.
That's right. Nature's resilient. We give it a chance. We give it some space, and it can bounce back pretty quickly. Okay, well, let's get into some more action with our classrooms. I'm going to get ready for the Q&A, but we're also going to play a little Kahoot quiz together that I made while you were presenting. So I'm going to share my screen. And as students are joining the Kahoot quiz, we are going to also start some Q&A. So if you're tuning in via YouTube, use the chat sidebar. You can start to send in some questions there. And then I'll bring a couple camera classrooms in as things are loading as well. And then, yeah, we'll go from there. So you should see a Kahoot quiz pop up there. There we go. You need to go to kahoot.it, and then it's going to generate a PIN number right now. So once you get to kahoot.it, you need to go and put in 303-1740. So kahoot.it, 303-1740. If you have Chromebooks or tablets at your seat, you could join that way. If not, your teacher could put up the front of the room. You could shout out your answers to him or her. If you're at home, use your phone or tablet and scan the QR code. There's a ton of different ways. I see lots of classes, lots of students coming in to join us, which is great. Okay, let's do a little Q&A before we get too far in. So we have a group hanging out with us. They are the Environmental Leaders Program. Let's check in and see if they have a question for us to get things started. All right, I think someone's up at the camera. I think you just need to unmute the mic because you're still on mute. It's our Environmental Leaders Program. If you have a question ready to go, we'll grab it from you now. Maybe.
There we go. All right.
We gotcha.
Hi. Right on. In your opinion, how can science and technology better address deforestation and habitat destruction? And is there any good examples of countries that have?
Yeah, I guess you meant have a good example, but thanks. That's a fantastic question. And yes, we do need to use technology. We need to use everything. Right now, we do have new tools such as satellite images and drones, which are helping a lot, but we still need climbers in the trees to figure out which insect is pollinating which orchid and which species is rare or common. So we need a combination of real people working with technology. But most important, we need a lot of change in our behavior as human beings to really save the forests. Believe it or not, we can't just blame the people that live in the Amazon or the people that live in Asia where the oil palm plantations are growing. We need to think about how we buy products. We in the Western world that might have makeup and cars and shampoos, we need to look at what we're buying and make sure that we do not buy ingredients that require the forest to be clear cut in order to plant it out, like soy and beef and palm oil. And we have to be careful of the sources of a lot of things. So working together, we need a lot more information about our purchasing power. And then we can go back and look for some exemplary countries that are helping us with that message. And right now, it's not so great because most countries are looking to us as buyers and consumers to set those rules and regulations up. But I pray that we will. French Guiana has a lot of its forests left. The country of Bhutan worships its forests. They have over 65% left. There are these amazing little islands of advanced knowledge where people in the government are protecting their trees. But unfortunately, most countries are still relying on the buying and selling of logs for a lot of things to be determined. So we can make a difference as shoppers, and I hope we will.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks to our crew in London, Ontario for a great question to kick us off. There's still a couple students still kind of slowly sneaking in, so I'm going to grab one more. Maybe we'll check in. Miss Fuller's class is joining us today. Where are they joining us today? They are in Michigan. If you have a question for us, go ahead and unmute and we'll grab your question before we start the Kahoot.
Well, good afternoon. We are a virtual school, so my students are on another screen and they are putting in the chat if they have a question for you.
Great.
All right. Okay. While we wait to see if one pops in, I'll ask a quick one from the YouTube spot. So Peyton wants to know, she's in Miss Wilson's class, after all these years, how easy it is for you now to climb a tree?
Oh my gosh. Well, of course, it's like riding a bike. Once you know how to do it, you'll always be able to climb a tree. I always think it's like an inchworm. Have you ever watched an inchworm going up and down? So it's really the center of gravity of your body that makes it pretty easy to climb trees. But the cool thing for me is because I was so challenged to get kids in wheelchairs and even my mom with her walker into the canopy. I love the canopy walkways best of all because they're very inclusive. Almost anybody can go in a walkway if you can build it so that it goes straight out from a hillside or a place that's easy to get into the treetops. So I'm all for these places that make it easier for people. The climbing on the rope is a little more challenging, but it still is pretty fun.
All right. Ms. Fuller, give me a thumbs up if you have a question. Otherwise, we'll come back. Okay, perfect.
So majority of our students are math students, and they want to know where you're using math in your job.
Oh my gosh, what a great question. And by the way, my son James was a math major. He modeled nitrogen in forests, so there was a big math project for him. In my day, of course, I did not have any handheld devices in the field, if you can believe it, but I used math all the time. I was monitoring about 8,000 leaves in the canopy. I was measuring the amount of damage of every leaf, how long it lived in the treetops, how much photosynthesis it made by monitoring one leaf in the lab and then multiplying by the numbers of leaves in trees. So everything was math. And something you'll learn someday is called statistics. I don't know if you do that in school yet. I never did that until I was about 20 years old, but that means I could figure out how to sample all my leaves without counting every single leaf, but having a representative sample of leaves. So a lot of canopy work is all about math, and I'm so proud of you guys for doing that.
All right. Very cool. Thanks, Mrs. Fuller's crew. We'll check in a moment. I am going to start the Kahoot now. I will go back to our AP Environmental crew, I promise. So hold that question. And yeah, we're going to play some Kahoot, and then we'll finish off with some more Q&A. So here we go. There are 5 questions today, a little true and false, a little multiple choice. The quicker you put the right answer in, the more points you're going to get. And then we'll see who is on our podium today. So first question. If you've ever climbed a tree, you're an aquanaut, arbornaut, astronaut, or a spelunker. So there you go. You have 4 things to think about. If you've ever climbed a tree, you are an aquanaut, an arbornaut, an astronaut, or a spelunker. You have a few more seconds to get your answer locked in, and then we'll see who's on top. All right. Good job, crew. Arbornaut might have been new to you today, but we didn't fool you. Obviously, aquanaut are our divers, astronauts up in space, and spelunkers go underground into those cool cave systems. Okay, the quick elk is quick and in first place at the moment. We've got a true or false coming your way. We've been exploring the tree canopy for over 100 years. Is that true or is that false? We've been exploring the tree canopy for over 100 years. Got a few more seconds to lock in your answer, and then we'll go from there. All right. Good job to the crew who chose false. It's more like 50 years that we've really been properly getting up there and really paying attention to that ecosystem. That puts the diligent dog into first place. Now, this next question coming up, I think, is going to be a multi-select question. And I'm telling you in advance because there's only 20 seconds on the clock. So I want you to be prepared to pick as many right answers as you can, as quickly as you can. So I want to make sure you're prepared and ready for that. Multi-select. Here we go. Click all the ways. Click all the ways Meg has explored the canopy. Are you going to click canopy walks, jetpacks, canopy blimps, or cranes? Which of those 4 are you going to click? Click as many ways that you think Meg has explored the canopy. Canopy walkways, jetpacks, canopy blimps, or cranes. All right. Not a lot of people went with jetpack, Meg. Maybe one day.
I'm excited. I would love to try it.
All right. Very cool. Let's go to our leaderboard. The Quick Elk back in the lead. 2 more questions coming your way. True or false to start? There are millions of insects in the tree canopy. Is that true or is that false? That there are millions of insects in the tree canopy. You got about 10 more seconds to lock in your best answer. There are millions of insects in the tree canopy. All right. Good job, crew. That's absolutely true. I do want a quick shout out to Miss Allerton's crew. I know your mic wasn't working before, so if you have any questions, put them into the private chat, and we'll make sure we work in a couple of those shortly. Here we go. Final question. Trees are important because they store carbon, they provide food, they hold soil in place, or all of the above. What's the best answer there for the importance of trees? Storing carbon, providing food, holding soil in place, all of the above. Of course, these are just a few options. There's a ton of reasons why trees are pretty darn important. All of the above is the best answer. All 3 of them are good, but all of the above is definitely the best choice there. Here we go. Let's look at our podium. In third place, we've got the silly goat. In second place, the diligent dog. Do we have a new leader in first place? The Quick Elk holding on for those last couple of questions. All right, crew, thanks for playing along. I'm going to turn off that music, and we'll spend the rest of the time in Q&A mode for the event. So many good questions coming in so far. I did promise I'd go back to our AP Environmental Science crew. So let's bring them in here and see if they have that question ready to go for us. There we go. Just grab the mute for me too. There we go. Perfect.
I have a question from Holly. Go ahead, Holly. I was wondering, over time, what species in the canopy have you seen be affected by human activities?
So a little bit of a, can you repeat that, Joe, for me?
Yeah, so I got most of it. Over time, what species in the canopy have you seen
Be affected by human activities.
Affected by what?
Human activity.
by human
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Well, that is a very interesting question because, of course, so many species are being affected by human activities. First and foremost, you have to think about how hard it is to measure insects, say, compared to sloths. So things that might get shot or killed for anybody's zoos or illegal activities or game food are going to be removed first. So we can count those pretty easily. But there's a whole lot of things like pollinators of rare orchids that are becoming extinct because fire and smoke kill them off, and the reduction of the forest means they don't have enough area to live in. So we have a huge problem in botany and in rainforests because they're so secretive, is trying to figure out what's rare and what's common. And that's where we're always wanting more Arbornauts to measure more trees and more species. But we now know that 38% of trees are endangered as trees alone, and something like 70% of what lives in them is considered endangered. So there's a lot of reasons to be really, really good stewards of our remaining trees. So thanks for asking.
All right, great question. We'll try and swing back your way again. Miss Fuller's class, they sent me a message here in the private chat. They're wondering about the biggest tree in the world and where it is.
Right. Great question. And of course, I saw the oldest tree as well. Some of the oldest trees in the world are only 3 feet high, so we don't have to climb them. But some of the biggest trees are 300 or so feet high. And it is measured by human beings. And every year people argue about this because the soil shifts, the branches get cut off. But the two areas where the biggest trees grow, one is the general Sherman tree in California. And some of my students, my student Anthony actually just measured that tree because it's being attacked by insects and everybody's really worried about it. Maybe it will get shorter as a result of the branches dying, but it's about 338 feet high. But the other tallest trees are in Borneo, over in Asia, and they're super high as well. A very crazy family called Dipterocarp. Sorry about that. It's only a technical name, but the hard thing there is they're so remote in the jungles that it's hard for people to measure them. So we think they're taller than the general Sherman tree, but we don't have as many ropes and gadgets in the middle of a jungle to measure them as we should. So and one is Borneo and one is California. So stay tuned. Maybe you guys will develop a tool to measure it better.
Okay. If there are any more camera classroom questions, you can send someone up and I'll see them there waiting. But I'm going to grab one or two from YouTube here. This is kind of a fun one. So I think some students think when they see you see a new species, it's just as simple as, there's a new species, done. So this class would like to know, if you could kind of briefly, what does it take to actually say there's been a new species found? What's the process?
Yeah, that's a really great question because it's what we call a bottleneck in science, meaning it's actually slowing us down to have to figure out if something is a new species. So when I go in the canopy, sometimes I find 100 species of bugs and I sample one of each. I never take everything and I bring them back. And then I have to check all the museums in the world that feature those bugs. I have to find the expert. Say it's a grasshopper. Who is the expert in grasshoppers? It's a lady beetle. Who is the experts in lady beetle? And I have to mail them the little samples and then they look at them and they might have 100 little jars on their desk of people asking questions. So the reason it's a bottleneck, it takes so much time. Maybe we can develop rapid DNA, and I'm working with some people in Asia where we might have this ability to basically just get a little bit of moisture off a leaf and be able to determine all the insect poop, for example, and the DNA. And we could say how many species and are they new or are they old? But that's a really up and coming field, trying to figure out which species and how many. And then, of course, in the end, you can start finding out if they're rare or endangered. So it's a pretty tough world. I say to myself, let's save the important forests where we know hundreds and thousands of things live. So then we can go back and fine tune how many species and what kind.
All right. Let's check in with our group in London. I think I see someone up there at the camera. Let's grab one more question from them.
Hi. What are some of the most endangered tree species or habitats that you've encountered, and what's being done to protect them?
Great question. So two of the most endangered are Ethiopia and I mentioned Madagascar. And with satellite image, we now can at least estimate the amount of forest left in a country. So both of those countries, less than 5% of their forest is left because it's been cleared for agriculture or for cities or for mining or burned, sometimes even by accident. And so those are the countries where I think we really need to do a blitz. We need to go in and help people. And that's why I'm trying to build walkways there, because we need to give them jobs. We can't just tell the local people, oh, please leave your trees alone, because maybe they're hungry and maybe they do need to use the trees for a lifestyle that they used to have. But we have to work together as different nations to provide for conservation. So those would be two I'd keep my eyes on. And go on my website, treefoundation.org, and look up the project Mission Green, because we're trying to save the 10 most endangered forests in the world with that project first. I worked, because it's great to save all the rest later, but we know that some are just so rare that we need to save those right away, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
All right, perfect. AP Environmental, I think I see someone waiting patiently.
This is Renee. Hi. How has being a woman impacted your experience as an Arbornaut?
Hugely. First of all, I wrote a whole book about it. So maybe you can get that book called The Arbornaut as a teacher and read chapter 6, where I kind of talked about the challenges of being a woman in science. First of all, as you can imagine, I've often been the only woman on most expeditions for reasons I can't quite explain, but maybe you can understand. Men seem to go into the jungle and like to be rough, and women seem to not. So I've oftentimes found myself being a big minority in those situations. And so I had to really climb well and do extra work and be extra smart in order to gain the respect of the men on the expedition. And also, though, on the good side is being a mom in the middle of a jungle somewhere. I can show pictures of my kids. I can work in the village with the other moms, and I get a lot of trust. So the trust factor as a woman in science is really high, and maybe higher than men. So now I'm very popular to have on expeditions as a result of that. So that's the good and the bad side. But we need more women in conservation. If you look at all the lists in the UN and different government bodies, there's usually very few women leading the charge for global conservation. So I think if we put girls at the leadership table, we'll have some good success.
All right. Perfect. Thank you for that question. I'm going to grab a couple more from YouTube, and then I think we might have to sign off for today. So let's see. Here's an easy one from Miss Fuller's class. They're wondering if you've ever slept in a hammock in the canopy up in the treetops.
Oh my gosh, yes. I make it a point to sleep in every tree canopy I study. And the reason is because people like you always ask me that question. It's every kid wants to know, A, did I sleep there? And B, how do I go to the bathroom? So I'll answer both. But I love sleeping in a hammock in the canopy. And number two, for girls, sometimes to go to the bathroom, you have to come to the forest floor. For boys, it's a lot easier. So I'm a little jealous about that. But it's the other reason I sleep in the canopy is I like to study bugs eating leaves, which is my specialty as a leaf detective. And guess what? Most bugs feed at night. Why do you think they would feed at night? Well, it's because the birds won't eat them. So it's like such basic science that took me about 2 years to figure out where are all the bugs. I could never see them by daytime. But when I went to the canopy at night, they were all up there munching in their salad bar, having a ball.
Yeah. Here's a great question here from Alexis in Hamilton. How do you ensure the canopy walkway doesn't disrupt or interfere in the habitat?
That's a great question. And number one, with a few mammals, it does, because they love to travel on them and they find them just quite wonderful. So we have to be cautious about studying mammals near a canopy walkway. But number two, we build them because the choice usually is clear cut the forest or build a canopy walkway in order to conserve the forest, because people can earn income from the walkway. So we always believe the walkway is much better. Maybe it disturbs 2 or 3%, but in actual fact, trails on the forest floor are much worse because they compact the soil and they affect animals trying to move across the forest floor. So a treetop walk is probably the minimum, but everything has a little impact and we need to understand that.
All right. Final question for you about being a citizen scientist. So what can kids do in the classroom, grade school, high school, what can they do right now to be active and help protect trees?
Fantastic. Number one, they can do what they're doing today, learn about it, but then they need to go and share it with other people. What's the importance of trees and why? In your own community, you can identify the big trees. Maybe you have a photo competition. Maybe you make a map of your town and say, here are these treasures. It's like finding rare and expensive artwork. If you have big trees in your town, you should bring it to the attention of adults so they'll save it. And you can go on my website anytime and look at the map of the world we have with all the canopy walkways. I would really encourage you to get your families out into nature, visit a canopy walkway near you, or plan a holiday as a family to go to a canopy walkway instead of maybe a racetrack or a rock concert, and see what you can see, because you're supporting the conservation of the forest. And the hardest thing, of course, is to be careful what you buy, as I mentioned before. That's a really tough one. But the more times you learn about new things and you're a little bit careful, like tell your teachers, don't buy coffee that comes from Central and South America. Buy coffee that comes from sustainable plantations. And you can ask at Starbucks, which coffee is coming from a sustainable source, and hopefully they can give you the answer. So good luck, and thanks for asking.
All right. Well, I'm going to share the link here to visit Mission Green and do a little exploration today if you have time in the classroom, or maybe when you get home. A huge shout out to our classrooms, our camera groups, to our classrooms on YouTube. Thanks for the great questions. Thanks for sending, playing Kahoot with us. And Meg, it is always such a great time to connect with you. You're doing such incredible work. And I hope it won't be too long before you're back in your second home up in the canopy.
I do too. And thank you, Joe. And I hope you'll join me next time.
Absolutely. Yeah. We should do something live from the canopy someday for class.
I think we could. Maybe next summer in Peru, you could come with me.
All right. Sounds good. Meg, thank you so much. Good luck with the project.
Great students and teachers. Really great work on all those teacher parts. Yeah. Have a good holiday, everybody.
Perfect. We're going to sign off for now.
Thank you.